I've chosen 8 men from the Rodgers and Hammerstein repertoire, and we're going to look at 45 seconds or so of a song with each of the characters. Please like and subscribe. And then I'll invite you to comment about the character, the show, the Rodgers and Hammerstein and their role, whatever you think is interesting about the that we look at.
Everything's up to date in Kansas City. They're gone about as far as they can go. They went and built a skyscraper 7 stories high, about the size a building ought to grow. Everything's like a dream in Kansas City. It's better than a magic lantern show. You can turn the radiator on every once in a while. With every kind of comfort, every house is on complete. You can walk to privies in the rain and never wet your feet. They've gone about as far as they can go. They've gone about as far as they can go.
Well, the irony was that most shows in those days used to start off with a big dance number. And Oklahoma played its cards very close to its vest because it was a good 15, 20 minutes into the show after we meet Curly, Laurie, Aunt Eller, and hear songs, Oh, What a Beautiful Morning, The Sorry with the Fringe on Top, et cetera, that we didn't have a dance number. And suddenly here comes a dance number, and it's by a secondary character. But also, one has to realize that not only will this become a dance number, an excuse for a dance number, because he says, here's the dance I just learned in Kansas City. So you get into that as a certain specialty of a dance, but more to the point, it was a comic number as well. You have to understand that the Empire State Building was only about 10 years old at that point, and New York is still reeling from the glory of having this big Empire State Building. And here's a guy talking about a building 7 stories high. And notice, about as high as a building ought to go, the conservatism of this part of the world, the fact that there are limits. There are self-imposed limits, but they're limits, how these people tend to limit themselves, and they only have a semi-myopic view of the world. And the idea of going to Kansas City, and this is just such an amazing place, did strike New Yorkers as a very, very funny thing.
Don't take my arm too much. Don't keep your hand in mine. Your hand feels so grand in mine. People will say we're in love. Don't dance all night with me till the stars fade from above. They'll see it's all right with me. People will say we're in love.
Hammerstein, because he loved to take a situation before it is resolved. Now, in the old days of operetta, you would have, sweet mystery of life, at last I found you. This is after they've established the love. Most of the times in operetta, you would have the love situations settled, and then they'd sing about how much in love they were. Here's just the opposite. Of course, he did it first in Showboat when he Make Believe I Love You, but he loved doing that, If I Loved You, qualifying the situation, not at all saying that we're in love already. He wanted to avoid that at all costs. One of the lyrics you didn't hear there, which is kind of interesting, is give me my rose and my glove, which sounds like a stretch. I mean, after all, there are only so many words that rhyme with love, and it's a very difficult thing. That's why you have so many lyrics involving stars above and planets above and the sun above and all that kind of stuff, the moon above, because it's one of the few words that rhymes. But Hammerstein found out that there really was an exchange of roses and gloves. One glove was given as a result of saying, this is for you, and the other glove is mine. And this is the way we're sharing the fact that we're together now. It's sort of like a harbinger of a ring, giving a ring to the girl. Well, here she would give you the glove, and that would indicate she's really interested in you. So while that sounds like a stretch of a lyric, it really isn't. But the important thing of this thing here is the fact that he is warning her that people will say we're in love, while essentially saying, I want to be in love with you, and you want to be in love with me, and you know it too, but we're hedging our bets. They've really been teasing each other throughout the entire show, and that's what really makes it very effective at the end of the first act, when she she realized when she's been playing Judd against Curly that now she has to go to the social with Judd, and she doesn't want to be with him. He scares her to death. But she's played this game, and now here are the consequences of the game. So it becomes very interesting from that point of view.
The way that they wrote vocally for the leading men is very different than the way they wrote vocally for supporting roles or comedic roles. Like Curly and Billy Bigelow are both like the romantic leads. They're the main characters. And then Will Parker is an example of someone who comes in as like a bit of a comedic relief. He's a bit of a side character. And so when you look at Kansas City, it's written in a much kind of higher tessitura, which is like a tessitura is basically the range where most of the song sits. So there can be some really high notes or some really low notes, but the tessitura is just a fancy word for the middle of the range. And it's written, they've gone about as far as they can go. Like that's an F, and he's hanging out on that F, which is pretty high. Whereas if you look at like People Will Say We're in Love, the only F he sings in the whole song is at the very end, and it's the big note, and he only reaches up there once, but most of the time he's sitting down much lower. Same with Oh What a Beautiful Morning. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. Like it sits much lower than Kansas City does. And same with Soliloquy, like they all sit much lower for the baritones and the basses for those leading male roles, but then higher for the comedic roles. And now we're kind of starting to see that flip where the leading men today are often singing way up high.
My boy Bill, I will see that he's named after me. I will. My boy Bill, he'll be tall and as tough as a tree. Well, Bill, like a tree, he'll grow with his head held high and his feet planted firm on the ground. And you won't see nobody dare to try to boss him or toss him around. No pot-bellied baggy-eyed bully will boss him around.
So Peter, tell us a bit about Billy Bigelow.
One thing I will say is that when I was in high school, which was a long time ago, I made a list of what I thought was the greatest songs in Broadway musical theater history. Number one was the Soliloquy. I'm sorry to say in a way that in all these years since my high school days that I haven't had anything to eclipse it. I really do believe this is the greatest thing that has ever happened to musical theater, the Soliloquy and Carousel. And of course, one of the things that's supposed to happen in musicals, and Rodgers and Hammerstein were very much into this innovation, was moving the action forward through a song. It wasn't just having a song that was very pretty and ending. They really wanted to advance the action. And this is the quintessential example of that, because here's a guy who starts out thinking, wow, I'm going to be a father to a son, and then realizes it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a son. And so as a result, he has to change his course entirely. He has to come to terms with the fact it could be a girl, and he's not happy with that at first, and then he sees the value of it. Now, this is important too, because Billy, after all, has very problematic educational and career problems. I mean, he doesn't have much of an education. He's only good at barking in the carousel. He's loyal to Julie in that he won't leave her. Even when he's asked to come back, he has to leave her. He won't do it. So he does love her in his own way, cockeyed though it may be. But the point is, he's a complicated character, and those complications do crop up here. We do see the egotism too when he says maybe he'll bark for a carousel, my son. Of course, it takes talent to do that well. Also, he talks about a skinny-lipped virgin, which was not used in the movie at all. They cut out the word virgin. But this is really, I think, such a titanic thing that it was really amazing that it really turned out as well as it did, considering all the roadblocks that you would have in this. And it was even longer originally. There was a section that was actually cut out as time went on, and it isn't very much done anymore. So as long as it may seem to a lot of people, and if you've seen the movie, it's the abbreviated version there.
So Peter, the bench scene has got the reputation as being, the key moment in Carousel that changed musical theater forever. You're saying that Soliloquy rivals it.
Well, I think soliloquy is a harder thing to do. If I Love You is a very pretty song, no question. And the scene is marvelous with the dialogue that goes in between it. And again, as we said, with the people will say I love situation, the conditional, if I loved you. But whoa, the soliloquy. I mean, that's a lot of words. That's a lot of music. That's a lot of moods in the music. So that's why I think it's really the apotheosis.
Okay, outstanding. Let's take a look at two characters from South Pacific.
Some enchanted evening, you may see a stranger. You may see a stranger across a crowded room, and somehow you know even then, that somewhere you'll see her again and again. Younger than springtime are you, softer than starlight are you, warmer than winds of June are the gentle lips you gave me, gayer than laughter are you, sweeter than music are you, angel and lover, heaven and earth are you to me.
Join our free weekly Broadway appreciation classes at thebroadwaymaven.com.
Peter, talk to me about the men of South Pacific.
Well, notice we have another conditional here. Some enchanted evening, you may see a stranger. And the point is, he is not saying, he's not talking about himself. He doesn't dare to talk about himself because he really is self-conscious about the fact that he's substantially older than she. That's been established in the twin soliloquies, but here he's doing it in a very oblique way by saying, this might happen to you. This might happen to somebody. He doesn't want to commit himself. He's still too scared. So that's what makes that interesting. This also became one of the most famous songs in musical theater history, to the point of which, even in the 1981 musical Merrily We Roll Along, there's a scene where two songwriters are auditioning the material, and the producer says, no, there's not a tune you can hum. And he gives Some Enchanted Evening as an example of a great song. And that's kind of interesting as well, because, of course, that's Sondheim writing that show. And, of course, Oscar Hammerstein was his mentor. So that's most interesting from that point of view. And it's also considered one of those bolt of lightning songs. That's a term that's often used to describe the ones that really stand out and really hit you in the gut. And today, of course, the bolt of lightning song is mostly the type of song that Mateo was talking about, where the guys are really going up high, and the bring 'em home type songs and Les Mis and what have you. But as far as cable is concerned, what we have here is a traditional thing in musical theater that you don't see in this context very often. And what I'm talking about is the fact that there's a great moment of exhilaration in so many musicals before disaster strikes. It'll happen in South Pacific too. Nellie's very happy until the kids walk in and she finds out she's going to be an instant stepmother to two Polynesian kids, and that is something she doesn't quite like at all. Annie says, yes, Daddy Warbucks, you can adopt me, and then the parents walk in. So that happens a lot, exhilaration before disaster. And what's interesting here is he is essentially saying, I love you, but he's going to leave her in 10 seconds. I mean, this is a goodbye kiss. This is a kiss off, which is kind of interesting that we really think that he's committing himself, but he can't do it. He can't do it because, after all, he comes from Philadelphia. What's he going to do? Bring this girl home? Are you crazy? His parents will kill him. So will the rest of his family. So as a result, I mean, even though he's praising her in a it's not you, it's me fashion, the fact remains that he's dumping her. And he does it in the best way he possibly can by praising who she is, but he can't make the commitment.
Something interesting about Some Enchanted Evening is it's interesting that is used as an example of a hummable tune, because compared to some of the other tunes, it's not as straightforward. It's got like it's got Some Enchanted Evening, like that F sharp is like not in the key signature. It's this is this kind of weird, dreamy added note that adds a lot of color and is beautiful, but it's not like, it's not humming. No?
I don't disagree with that. Of course, Rodgers was very famous for the wrong note. You know what I mean? You've heard that expression.
We talked about it. We talked about Old Deuteronomy and cats. We talked about this.
Yeah, the wrong note. He loved doing that, and so that applies here too. But I see your point. It certainly isn't as hummable as what you just played.
When my father was a king, he was a king who knew exactly what he knew. And his brain was not a thing forever swinging to and fro in two. Shall I then be like my father and be willfully unmovable and strong? Or is better to be right, or am I right when I believe I may be wrong?
Peter, tell us about the King of Siam.
What's really interesting here is the only time we see any vulnerability until the very end of the show when he can't whipped up him. But the point is, up until now, he's just been this despot, who I am right and you are wrong, and I have all the answers and you don't have any, and whatever I say goes. And now that he's alone, we see what's really on his mind. This is a soliloquy of a different kind. Needless to say, it's not as long as the soliloquy in Carousel, but there's enough in there to let us know that he has his uncertainty. And it's really interesting at the beginning that he talks about his father, because indeed, well, there was a book that came out in the 80s called Father, and above it said, he was once the most important man in your life. He still is. The fact is that so many of us are still haunted by our fathers and what they meant to us and what they said to us and the advice they gave us. We've become our own people, but nevertheless, way in the back of our minds, we wonder if our fathers were right, if they had points that we didn't know. And that's happening here with the King of Siam. He's dealing with the previous king, just as Prince Chulalongkorn at the end of the show will certainly be influenced by his father as well, even though he says no more bowing down, you don't have to do that anymore. So he's his own person, but he's still going to be influenced by his father. Everything doesn't change right away, little by little by little by little. But here's a man who has his doubts, and it's until the end of the show, the only time we see him be less than imperious. And that's what's valuable about this song.
10 minutes ago I saw you. I looked up when you came through the door. My head started reeling. You gave me the feeling the room had no ceiling or floor. 10 minutes ago I met you, and we murmured our how do you do. I wanted to ring out the bells and fling out my arms and to sing out the news. I have found her, she's an angel, with the dust of the stars in her eyes. We are dancing, we are flying, and she's taking me back to the skies.
Peter, what do you have to say about Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella?
Well, let's talk about Rodgers for a second, because after all, even though Johann Strauss was known as the Waltz King, in terms of musical theater, Richard Rodgers was certainly the Waltz King. So many of his most memorable melodies certainly have been waltzes, and this is one of the finest one. This was done for TV, and yet they didn't treat it as a second-class citizen, figuring, well, it's only TV, and TV had very little credence in those days. The boob tube was a very famous thing alleged by it, so they could have really said, oh, we don't care about this one, let's just toss it off. But they really did scrupulous care here, and this is one of Rodgers' best waltzes. However, what I find very interesting about this, I do think that Oscar Hammerstein could have been a little less lazy and written a very different lyric for when Cinderella comes in, because all Cinderella does is say exactly what the prince said, and we'd like her to be more interesting. The fact is, we would prefer that the prince doesn't fall in love with Cinderella simply because she's pretty. It'd be nice if she were really interesting, and she might have had a few interesting perceptions as opposed to just saying the same thing over and over again. Still, in terms of the waltz itself, it's a glorious waltz, and we're lucky to have it.
Sound of Music, Captain Von Trapp. Peter.
What's really amazing is that Theodore Becque, who was a folk singer of quite good reputation during the entire 50s, got the part and had so little to do originally because this song was not in the show originally. And it's amazing to think that all he really had up until that point was a little bit of a reprise of The Sound of Music. It's amazing he took the part. And it's amazing they gave him so little to do. But it wasn't until after the New Haven tryout, when they were in Boston, they realized they had to do something to give him more material, and they needed something. And the idea of having a song that really praised Austria under difficult circumstances. Now, the Anschluss has happened, the Nazis have taken over, and even though they claim everything's going to be the same, we know it's not. So this is a folk song to praise Austria in an oblique way, rather than saying, we love Austria and we hate the Germans. This is done very subtly to say, this is the Austria we knew that is no more. So it's very poignant in that way. And in fact, he has trouble finishing it. And indeed, his new wife, Maria, has to take over and the kids take over. And it's enough for them to win the festival, which is something they need to do. They need to kill time too, so to get out and escape. But really, it's quite a beautiful song, and it's amazing how many people truly believe that it is an Austrian folk song that was interpolated into the show, that it wasn't something that Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote at all. So many people say, no, I heard that song long before The Sound of Music. That's said so many times during that period of time. No, that's an old song. No, it wasn't. It was a brand new song, and it's famous, of course, because it was the last song that Oscar Hammerstein wrote. The show opened in November. The following summer, he was dead. And so it was his last song, and it has power for that reason as well. And we like to think that Bless My Homeland Forever also, this is a stretch, I'll grant you, means Broadway too. That he was really saying his goodbye to Broadway in this song and saying, bless my homeland forever, because Broadway was his home for virtually the entire 20th century up to that point.
No, I've heard the same story about two other songs. One is that Old Man River is a Negro spiritual going back decades and decades.
Right.
And then the other one is that Tomorrow Belongs to Me was written by the Nazis.
Right. Yes, that's very true. Both of those songs have that same type of, oh, I heard that before. What are you talking about? That wasn't written for the show. And the irony, of course, with Sound of Music is that when Mary Martin originally went to Rodgers and Hammerstein and said, listen, I want to do a show about the Trapp family singers. I'm going to use all their own songs, the songs that they actually sang, but can you add one or two where we need them? And they said, no, we're not going to add one or two. We either do all or nothing, to quote a song from Oklahoma. And that's the way it's going to be. And she said, well, if you're willing to write the whole show, I'm not going to say no to that. I mean, that's quite an offer. So go ahead. And of course, it became their most beloved show. Didn't run as long as Oklahoma. No. But nevertheless, or even South Pacific. But nevertheless, it is considered the one that is most beloved, and partly, of course, because of that 1965 movie, which was the first movie to eclipse Gone with the Wind, which, after all, was, 25, 30 years earlier, 1939 to 65. I don't know my math. What is that, 26 years? Okay. So, I mean, that was quite an achievement. That happened. And of course, the Sound of Music movie was also responsible for so many other musical movies of the 60s that bombed. And that's why we didn't have movie musicals for a long time. People were afraid of them. But Sound of Music was both something that we have a love-hate relationship with because of all the good it did and all the harm it did to future musical movies.
I think just something about Edelweiss is how simple it is,
Mm-hmm.
is extraordinary, because it packs so much of an emotional punch. But if you look at it objectively, it's just da 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 4 times, and then it's done. And it's so simple, and yet in its simplicity, it's very elegant. And I feel like if Hammerstein had written a lyric that was like, oh, I went down to the store and I noticed there was an Edelweiss on my path and blah blah blah, and went on and on and on, it wouldn't have the same effect. It's the simplicity of it that makes it so beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a difference between simple and simplistic. And this is a simple song, but it's not a simplistic one.
Can you tell us a little bit about the men of Rodgers and Hammerstein?
The way that they create music for men is very different from the way that music is created for men today. And it's specifically leading men and the men that the audiences are supposed to be cheering for. Because in Rodgers and Hammerstein's day, all the leading men were baritones or basses. It was seen as a trait of masculinity to have a nice low voice. You know, you've got, if I loved you, and the big high notes that they sing are like a high F, you know? But now we have shows like Dear Evan Hansen is a great example, but even shows that are a little bit like more romantic, like Jagged Little Pill, the leading man is a tenor. Like all of these in If Then, the romantic leading role is a super high tenor, that kind of thing. And so we're kind of glamorizing more higher voices in men today. Back in the day, it was all baritones and basses, which says something about the societal expectations of masculinity and stuff.
And here's another video I think you'll like.